Good morning. Today is the 9th of Kislev and the 22nd of November. We're reading the fourth reading of Vayeitzei. And in our fourth reading, we come across something that we could have spoken about for hours, but we had to make a decision about whether we would talk about the Kabbalistic content here or something a little bit different. So, in the fourth reading, there's a very interesting thing that we have all the progeny of Jacob being born. And there's so much to say about each one of these tribes and the meaning of its name and so on. But we decided to focus on something that is a little bit roundabout, but then you'll get the idea. If you remember, we said that Leah, the elder of the twins, of Rachel and Leah, she's more connected to thought. She's more connected to the concealed dimension. So she's more concealed and reticent. She doesn't express herself so easily. And yet, she has 6 children. And then with the 2 more children came from her maidservant Zilpah, so she has 8, and 2/3 of the 12 tribes. But they're not born in sequence, meaning she doesn't have 6 and then 2 more. She has 4, and then she stops giving birth. She hands her maidservant Zilpah over. She has 2 children. And then Leah, there's a strange episode that happens before the birth of the last 2 children that Leah has, Yisachar and Zvulun. And the episode is, it says, when Jacob came home from the field in the evening, before that, Reuben came home and he had found mandrakes. Now, this is an approximate translation. We don't know exactly what dudaim are. But we say they're mandrakes because they're considered to be an aphrodisiac. They're called mandrakes, a type of plant, because supposedly when you take it out of the ground, the root has the form of a human being. And this is a very common thing in the animal world, in the plant world, that things that have the same form are connected. For instance, I think everybody knows by now that it's a really good idea to eat nuts. Why is it a good idea to eat nuts? Especially walnuts and pecans. Because you don't have to be a genius to see that it looks like a brain. I mean, you look at these things, they look exactly like the brain. And we know that that's exactly what they affect. The oils, the essential oils in it, and the fats in this are apparently just as good as any other type of fat that the brain needs. It's specifically for the brain. So these mandrakes are some kind of aphrodisiac. And Rachel wants them. She wants these 2 mandrakes that Reuben has found. And so she buys them from Leah. And how is that going to happen? So she says, look, give me the mandrakes, says Rachel, because she hasn't had any children yet, and she's looking for an aphrodisiac, or something to increase fertility. And in return, I'll let you be with Jacob during the time that's allotted to me. And that's what happens. And that's when Leah conceives Yisachar and Zvulun, her 5th and 6th sons. Now, what is going on here? What's so special about this? This was not Leah's nature. Like we said, she's reticent, she's reserved. For her to come and make a deal like that, remember, who is Leah? She's the woman who was willing to get married and didn't say a word about it instead of Rachel. That's almost unthinkable. Imagine what kind of, she must be full of fear. What will happen if he discovers what? She doesn't say a word. She's not the type to go and make deals. She's not the type to want to hound the husband that she shares with her sister. On the contrary, she's like exactly the opposite. So what is she doing here? Why is she willing to? She says to her, "You want to take my mandrakes too?" She says, "Okay, give me the mandrakes. I'll give you your husband." That's not typical of her. In fact, I didn't mention, but she also has a daughter after this. And we know, remember when we talked about Yisachar and Zvulun, when we were talking about the blessings that Moses gave them, we said that they work together, and both of them are considered to be, Yisachar is the leader in terms of Torah. He's a thinker, he's like Leah, he's very much into thought, but he's not reticent. He's not someone who stays quiet. On the contrary, he's the head of the Sanhedrin. All his children were heads of Sanhedrin. They're great speakers. Zebulun, the other son that's born now, is the merchant. He's on the waters. He's the one who goes and does all the business. Again, this is not typical of Leah. But we see that these two tribes, it's as if their essence was taken from this type of barter that Leah did with her sister. And this carried on to the children. But what's even more important, I didn't mention this before, there's also a daughter that's born from this agreement between Rachel and Leah, Dinah. And later, in next week's Parsha, actually not next week's, 2 weeks from now, we will see that Dinah is considered to be an outgoing girl. Another one of these effects of Leah changing her skin, as it were. So how did this exactly happen? What's going on? So how did she suddenly take the initiative? Where did she suddenly get this sense that she can change her character, she can change her personality, she can act out of character, and that carries on? So for that, there's a very interesting meditation that we're going to do now. And it says like this: Rabbi Akiva has a statement that's considered to be the most concise and because of that also difficult statement about free will and God's knowledge. And it reads like this. He says, everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is granted. The world is judged with goodness, and everything is in accordance with the preponderance of actions. Okay, so the first two statements are the ones we're going to focus on. The world is, everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is granted. That's our classic conundrum and dilemma, or in this case, conflict between there's absolute knowledge, God has omniscience, and on the other hand, man has free will. One way of looking at this, instead of trying to solve the dilemma, is to understand, is like what Maimonides basically says, but with a little twist, that it's at different times. What do we mean by different times? There are times in the year where things flow as if they're predetermined. And yet there are times of the year where the feeling is that it all depends on your actions. It's like different times. It's not trying to describe that at every single moment, and that's also true, but in every single moment it like creates a contradiction, a paradox. But if you take it at face value, that there are times where everything is foreseen, there are times where freedom of choice is granted, not at the same time. There's one way of looking at it. So how would we do this? So Rav Ginsburg years ago had this interesting meditation. He said, let's take the months of the year. There's 12 months altogether. There's 4 parts to this statement. Again, everything is foreseen. Freedom of choice is granted. The world is judged with goodness. And everything is according to the preponderance of action. 4 parts. And since we have 12 months, let's say that every group of 4 months fits this model. So where would we start? So he says the easiest way to start is ask, where is freedom of choice granted? To what month does that belong most clearly? And he says, that belongs most clearly to the month of Iyar. Iyar is the month after Nisan. It's the second month when we count the year from Nisan. Right? We have two heads of the year, Nisan and Tishrei. We've talked about this in the past. From Nisan is the first month, Iyar is the second, Sivan is the third, and then Tammuz. So you take the first quartet here, and you correspond them to each one of these statements. So the first Nisan would say, everything is foreseen. In Iyar, the feeling is one of, and freedom of choice is granted. And then we have the third part in Sivan, the world is judged with goodness. And then in Tammuz, and everything is according to the preponderance of action. And then you repeat this again 2 more times in the months of the year. And then you have this interesting model. Why is this so interesting to what we were talking about? Because Iyar is the month that corresponds to Yisachar, the 5th son of Leah. And just like we just said, the freedom of will here is very apparent in Yisachar. He, in fact, what does his name mean? His name means there is reward. There cannot be reward and punishment if there is no free will. Yisachar, to a great degree, is the exemplar of what it means to have free will. And like we just said, he represents the complete shift and change in Leah's character, from being someone who is reserved and not spoken at all, and not able to communicate maybe. She has a son who is the complete opposite, because Yisachar himself has something to do with free will. He's essentially representing free will. It's almost like putting now the horses before the wagon, not the wagon before the horses, in saying that the reason that Leah was able to make this deal and barter with her sister, with Rachel, was because this was what was coming out of her, Yisachar. And then Zvulun. The world is judged with goodness. Nidon, it's judged. What do you mean it's judged? That's exactly what Zvulun is about. Zvulun is about this weighing of things. He's the merchant. And he wants it to be with goodness. He wants to make a profit. That's how he sees it. And so the world is judged with goodness. In other words, you always have to have a keen eye, a good eye for a good deal, to make everything worthwhile for everyone. That's what it means to judge the world with kindness, with goodness, to make sure that everybody wins, that everybody is ahead once it's finished. So we have this very interesting idea that Leah here is going through a transformation. And this transformation is the addition of free will into her name, as it were, like into her character. Until now, even Leah, I don't know if you know, actually there's a lot of words in English that are the same, like lame. A lot of stuff that starts with Leah, even in English, means the same thing. In Hebrew, it means lethargic. Le'ah, le'ut, is to be lethargic. But now she transforms. She comes into Iyar, she comes into Yisachar, she comes into this child Zvulun, into Dinah, and suddenly she's transformed from this lethargic, laid-back, unspoken, soft-spoken, reserved person into someone who's different. What is this about? About this we say, Em habanim smecha. The mother of the children is joyful. By simcha, we don't just mean joy. Simcha is also here both connected to the mother principle and connected to Yisachar and Zvulun, because free choice is in mother. It is in the mother principle. That's we can't get into, but just take my word for it. That's how we see it. It's connected to Yisachar and to Zvulun. This ability to create life, whether it be through childbearing, or it can also be, like we always say, taking a foster child or teaching a child Torah. These are many, many ways in which a person brings life into the world. All these things, bringing life into the world, changes a person's character. It develops it, and it allows us to go from our initial state to a new state, to something that is like giving birth. And suddenly by giving birth, all the more so when it is an actual child, you can expect a change. You can expect new things to come out of you and to become a different type of person.